The Scots are going to lead the way next year. You watch. When they get independence, that'll be the trigger. Celtic people right across the country are going to make their move. Want another one? He added, gesturing towards Strike's empty pint glass. Strike had come out to the pub craving a respite from tension and worry, not to be harangued about Cornish politics. Polwarth's allegiance to Mebyon Kerno, the nationalist party he'd joined at 16, appeared to have gained a greater hold over him in the year or so since they had last seen each other. Dave usually made Strike laugh like almost nobody else, but he brooked no jokes upon Cornish independence, a subject that for Strike had all the appeal of soft furnishings or train spotting. For a second, Strike considered saying that he needed to get back to his aunt's house, but the prospect of that was almost more depressing than his old friend's invective against supermarkets that resisted putting the cross of St. Piran on goods of Cornish origin. "Great, thanks," he said, passing his empty glass to Dave, who headed up to the bar, nodding left and right to his many acquaintances. Left alone at the table, Strike's eyes roamed absently over the pub he'd always considered his local. It had changed over the years, but was still recognisably the place in which he and his Cornish mates had met in their late teens. He had an odd double impression of being exactly where he belonged, and where he'd never belonged, of intense familiarity and of separateness. As his gaze moved aimlessly from timber floor to nautical prints, Strike found himself looking directly into the large, anxious eyes of a woman standing at the bar with a friend. She had a long, pale face, and her dark shoulder-length hair was streaked with grey. He didn't recognise her, but he'd been aware for the past hour that certain locals were craning their necks to look at him, or else trying to catch his eye. Looking away, Strike took out his mobile and pretended to be texting. Acquaintances had a ready excuse for conversation if he showed the slightest sign of encouraging them, because everyone in St. Mawes seemed to know that his Aunt Joan had received a diagnosis of advanced ovarian cancer 10 days previously, and that he, his half-sister Lucy, and Lucy's 3 sons had hastened at once to Joan and Ted's house to offer what support they could. For a week now he'd been fielding inquiries, accepting sympathy and politely declining offers of help every time he ventured out of the house. He was tired of finding fresh ways of saying, "Yes, it looks terminal, and yes, it's shit for all of us." Polwarth pushed his way back to the table, carrying 2 fresh pints. "There you go, Diddy," he said, resuming his bar stool. The old nickname hadn't been bestowed, as most people assumed, in ironic reference to Strike's size, but derived from didikoi, the Cornish word for gypsy. The sound of it softened Strike, reminding him why his friendship with Polwarth was the most enduring of his life. 35 years previously, Strike had entered St. Mawes Primary School a term late, unusually large for his age, and with an accent that was glaringly different from the local burr. Although he'd been born in Cornwall, his mother had spirited him away as soon as she'd recovered from the birth, fleeing into the night, baby in her arms, back to the London life she loved, flitting from flat to squat to party. 4 years after Strike's birth, she'd returned to St. Mawes with her son and with her newborn, Lucy, only to take off again in the early hours of the morning, leaving Strike and his half-sister behind. Precisely what Leda had said in the note she left on the kitchen table, Strike had never known. Doubtless she'd been having a spell of difficulty with a landlord or a boyfriend, or perhaps there was a music festival she particularly wanted to attend. It became difficult to live exactly as she pleased with 2 children in tow. Whatever the reason for her lengthening absence, Leda's sister-in-law Joan, who was as conventional and orderly as Leda was flighty and chaotic, had bought Strike a uniform and enrolled him in the local school. The other 4.5-year-olds had gawped when he was introduced to the class. A few of them giggled when the teacher said his first name, Cormoran. He was worried by this school business, because he was sure that his mum had said she was going to home-school him. He tried to tell Uncle Ted that he didn't think his mum would want him to go, but Ted, normally so understanding, had said firmly that he had to, so there he was, alone among strangers with funny accents.